Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. So it looks like we did end up getting a pullback in the price of precious metals after all. Yesterday we had a pretty significant drop in the price of both gold and silver. Gold back down under 1900 bucks, silver down more than 5% on the day. And I had originally forecast earlier in the week that we might see a pullback like that following the FOMC press conference on Wednesday, but of course that didn't manifest itself. But instead, yesterday on Friday, when we got the non-farm payroll jobs report, that did trigger the sell-off. And I will say that, on days like Friday and weekends like this weekend, when the price of silver is in the red in a big way, a 5% drop in one day is pretty significant. These are the times that I like to stack, and I actually did pull the trigger on another kilo bar of silver from SD Bullion yesterday, so that should be arriving shortly. I'll be doing an unboxing for you guys. And if you're interested in doing some silver stacking over the weekend with the pullback that we just saw, SD Bullion does still have a pretty good sale going on silver bars, and they also happen to be today's video sponsor, so you can check them out with the link down in the description. Now let's talk about the jobs numbers that were released yesterday, because we added a surprisingly high 517,000 jobs. And it seems like the mainstream financial media is hailing this as the signs of a strong U.S. economy, but I'm not so sure about that. Let's delve into these numbers a little bit and let's try to see what's actually going on and what can be gleaned from this report. Well, right off the bat, 74,000 of these jobs that were added were government jobs. So, kind of hard to say whether or not these jobs are adding to the economy in any meaningful way at all. I'm not saying we don't need any government employees, but I will go out on a limb and say that we probably already do have too many of them. So I don't necessarily consider these 74,000 jobs to be good news necessarily, but that does leave 443,000 private sector jobs added in the month of January. Now, of that, only 46,000 are goods producing jobs. So that's less than 10% of the total jobs added. And the vast majority of these jobs that we got in January are in the service sector. Now, when it comes to inflation and jobs fighting inflation, the supply side does include a pool of goods and services, but clearly based on these job numbers, our economy is disproportionately geared towards creating services. And so I don't think that, even though we did add a lot of jobs, this is going to put a lot of downward pressure on inflation because, like I said, the majority of these jobs are not actually producing real goods that are going to market. They're producing services. And of that service sector, the biggest subsector, once again, is leisure and hospitality, adding 128,000 jobs. Now, of that, 113,000 are food service employees. So really, what's the real story here? What's the overall story? The government is growing, the government is hiring, and also we're getting lots of bartenders and waiters added into the economy. Now, meanwhile, tech sector jobs, high-paying jobs, those continue to drop like flies. We've got Amazon, Google, PayPal, Microsoft, Meta, formerly known as Facebook. They're all laying off chunks of their workforce, and I'm sure I missed some of the tech sector names there that are dropping employees, but it's not good, And the food service jobs, I suspect that a lot of those jobs are probably part-time, and they may even be second jobs for folks who already have full-time employment. So, let's be honest, these are not the greatest jobs in the world. And I'm not trying to denigrate people who work in food service. I myself worked in food service for many years. But I will say that, a lot of these people, there's a strong likelihood that they'd probably prefer to be doing something else. Sure, there are some people who are passionate about food and food service, but for every great food service job, there's 10 crappy ones. And certainly for anybody who is being forced to acquire a second job just to make ends meet, I'm sure that they would absolutely prefer to not have that job. But, the situation is that the cost of living in this country with the rampant inflation, it's gotten so bad that people are now forced to go out and get second jobs. We've already got credit cards getting maxed out. That's one thing that consumers have been leaning on as prices continue to rise, consumer debt. But obviously that's not sustainable. That can't go on forever. And especially now that interest rates are continuing to move up. And on credit cards, they're at absolutely insane usurious levels. We're talking like 20 to 30% interest. So, I have a strong suspicion that a lot of that debt may actually end up getting defaulted on at some point, and that could be a real economic problem, just as kind of a tangential thing here. If consumers get squeezed to the point where they have to default on this credit card debt, that could trigger a crisis in and of itself. If these debt issuers are forced to start writing off big chunks of this debt, people are now having to go out and get additional work just to pay their bills. So, I don't really think that this jobs report is the sign of a healthy economy that the media seems to be playing it out to be. But investors do seem to be taking this report as a sign of economic strength. And of course, under normal circumstances, you'd think that this would be good for markets, but we've got a sell-off. So what's going on? Well, now we live in this bizarro world in which the only thing driving price action in these markets is the perception of what the Fed is going to do next. And as far as that perception goes, a better jobs number, it leads investors to believe that the Fed is now on a trajectory to possibly hike more, to be tighter, to pursue a more hawkish monetary policy. And the only way that hiking rates at this point, what the Fed is doing to fight inflation, is going to work is to destroy jobs and to destroy demand. And insofar as new jobs are still being created, it does mean that the Fed may take this as a sign that it has the wiggle room to hike rates even further. Because the real steps that are needed to fight inflation, that would be reining in deficit spending and tightening up fiscal policy, there's not a chance that that's going to happen, if you ask me. I mean, just look at the deliberations over and the fear-mongering that surrounds raising the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is going to get raised, and so as inflation continues to rise, the Fed may need to get even more hawkish to try to bring it down. And I think that Powell believes that in order to be successful, he needs to destroy jobs or at least slow down the pace of job creation and destroy demand. And so this really does mean that the Fed may be getting a little bit more hawkish in the near future. And personally, I believe that this idea of demand destruction, it won't actually work in practice. In fact, destroying jobs may actually exacerbate the inflation problem because fewer people working and contributing to the pool of goods and services, from a supply side, that could mean higher prices. But I do think that investors are correct that this news indicates that the Fed may be moving into a more hawkish way of thinking in the near future. And, who knows, maybe we'll even see a return to 50 basis point rate hikes, particularly if the inflation numbers begin to tick up again, or if they persist at the elevated level that they're still at. Because what that would mean, would it be an end to the disinflation that Powell mentioned so many times in his post-FOMC press conference back on Wednesday. But even if the Fed does tighten up a bit more before this cycle of rate hikes ends, eventually a massively levered up economy like we have, with onerous levels of debt across pretty much all sectors, it may not be able to withstand these rate hikes for too long before something really breaks in the economy. And when that happens, I believe the Fed is going to revert to the old policy tool, print, quantitative easing, rate cuts, stimulus, once it appears that there are no other viable options, and once the pressure from politicians and the public at large becomes unbearable for them. But they might wait until everybody is begging for them to cut rates, and that way, when inflation runs out of control, they can say, oh, well, what choice did we have? That is why I am happy to continue to accumulate hard assets like physical silver on days like yesterday when we saw the price of the metals go deeply into the red. And talking about accumulating new metal, I just actually had a tube of these 2023 maple leafs come in. And, I think that the 2023 maple leafs with the Queen's effigy on them, say what you will about the Queen, because this is the last year that this coinage is going to have her on the obverse there, I think that there may be a little bit of additional collectability to these 2023 Commonwealth coins that are going to have the Queen for potentially the last time. So that's why I added a tube of those to my stack, and I'm happy to have it. Hard assets at times like this are good to get your hands on. And there's also some other developments that we've had in the past week that lead me to believe that precious metals ultimately will be headed much higher, probably not in the too distant future. And those relate to the continuing trend of de-dollarization that we are witnessing across the global south and Asia. So let's get into a couple of those headlines. There were several this week. The first one was this: Egypt's parliament endorses pact to join BRICS Bank. Now, the Egyptian president recently wrapped up a visit to India, and then a few days later, the Egyptian parliament, they have endorsed an agreement that will officially allow Egypt to join the new BRICS Development Bank. And what is the Egyptian parliament's stated motivation for this move? Well, it is to help reduce the demand for US dollars. And this is a quote from the deputy chairman of Egyptian Parliament's Economic Committee, Abdel Hamid, who said, Egypt's joining of the BRICS Group's New Development Bank will also relieve the state budget of the pressure of finding US dollars to meet the country's imports, as members of the bank can use their national currencies in exchange for trade. So this is just another one of those developments in the death by 1,000 cuts for the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And, we're going to be seeing many more of these moves throughout this year, specifically in August when the BRICS summit takes place in South Africa. We know, based on recent comments from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, that a new BRICS currency system to rival the dollar will be on the agenda at that meeting. And we also heard earlier this week that Russia and Iran are taking steps now to integrate their banking systems, and this is to help these countries get around the sanctions that they have been placed under, and specifically their denial of access to the SWIFT system. So they are now looking for alternatives to bypass SWIFT altogether. And this new communication system that is being forged by Iran and Russia is going to connect roughly 700 Russian banks and 106 foreign banks from 13 countries. That's according to Mohsen Karamini, the deputy governor of Iran's central bank. And this also comes on the heels of the recent announcement from Russia and Iran that they are working on a gold-backed stablecoin currency likely to be used for the settlement of international payments for energy. And again, none of these moves away from the dollar individually represents a major threat to the dollar's status as the world reserve currency, but taken collectively, you can see that the stage here is being set for the emergence of two global financial systems. One will be based on the dollar, and it's probably going to be used by the G7, the US, Europe, Japan, Australia, maybe a few other allies. Then this alternative system that is emerging is going to be based on either a BRICS currency of some sort or, maybe gold or a gold-backed stablecoin. We don't have all the details yet because it hasn't fully emerged, but it is coming. And this is not a good sign for the dollar and for the dollar's purchasing power and dollar strength around the world. Now, many of these countries involved in this emerging secondary financial system, such as China, maybe Saudi Arabia, they're major holders of U.S. debt, U.S. treasuries, and they have been major buyers of U.S. debt for years. And if they really dump that debt in a big way or a coordinated way, or, even if they just stop buying U.S. debt from here on out, that means that there will be a higher cost of borrowing for the U.S. And we know that more borrowing is the plan. That's why the debt ceiling is going to get raised because, there's really no debt ceiling in practice, and if foreign nations stop buying this U.S. debt, I think we all know who's going to be picking up the slack, and that is not going to be good for the purchasing power of the dollar. So I do take all of these developments as a sign that we stackers are on the right track, getting out of fiat currencies and into hard money. Of course, this isn't financial advice. Everybody's situation is different. But as for me, I am happy to continue stacking up the shiny stuff. Now, finally, in addition to the bifurcation of the global financial system that we're witnessing, we have got geopolitical tensions around the world continuing to rise. And that does mean that we aren't going to go back to one integrated global financial system anytime soon, if you ask me. Specifically, I do just want to touch on this story about this Chinese weather balloon, spy balloon, who knows, the one that was spotted over the U.S. a couple days ago and has been really on the front page of many of the mainstream media outlets since then. So you kind of got to wonder why they've got us focusing on this so much. And this weather balloon, supposedly that's what it is. It's making a meteorological measurements. That's according to the Chinese government. But it is interesting that they seem to want to get these weather readings over sensitive military sites in Montana, where the U.S. has a lot of its ballistic missile silos. And I guess it's too dangerous to shoot this down. That is what we're hearing from U.S. military officials who have advised the president, supposedly, not to shoot this down because of the risk of debris. Now, that sounds kind of like BS to me. I mean, this thing is floating over Montana, not a particularly densely populated state. I think they probably could have shot this thing down if they wanted to. And, I'm not a military guy. I'm certainly not an expert on dirigibles or airships or balloons or anything. My thought is, I wonder why the U.S. doesn't just capture this thing. I mean, I guess it is flying pretty high, much higher than commercial or military aircraft, but it seems like if we have the technology to launch satellites and, shoot these things down, we probably could just scoop them up and pull them down to Earth and maybe examine, reverse engineer what the heck the Chinese are doing with this tech package on this balloon. And, there's all sorts of things I've read about these balloons. Everything from the fact that they could be used as a EMP delivery device to maybe this is just a trial run by the Chinese to, use these for all sorts of nefarious purposes over the U.S. But regardless of, what ends up going on with this balloon, the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, he's now canceled a planned trip to China as a result of this whole balloon thing. So this is just another sign of the ongoing chilling of relationship between the U.S. and China. And if this thing is how we're kicking off 2023, it's looking like this is going to be another weird year. So I think we all need to be getting prepared for that and doing what we can to prepare for potential SHTF, which may be just around the corner. Dollar collapse, World War III. This stuff all seemed kind of like fringe theories a couple years ago, but it's starting to look more and more like the direction we're headed in. So let me know what you think about all these developments in the comments. Are you going to be doing some stacking this weekend with the pullback in the price of metals? I talked to the folks over at SD Bullion, and I know that they are having a busy weekend, so a lot of people are doing that. And if you are, leave me a comment down below to let me know what you're stacking. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay safe and happy stacking. I'll catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.